That was the night I called my brother. And that was the night I understood exactly what kind of family I had almost married into. I was 32. I had a good job. I worked as a project coordinator at a mid-size construction firm in Calgary, the kind of work that's unglamorous but stable, the kind that keeps the lights on and lets you save a little every month. I wasn't rich. I wasn't pretending to be. I had a one-bedroom apartment in Beltline, a used Civic that ran well enough, and a life that felt, for the first time in a long time, like it was moving in the right direction. His name was Fletcher Ames. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming in Inglewood, the kind of party where everyone ends up in the kitchen talking too loud because the music in the living room is too much. He was funny in a quiet way, the kind of funny that sneaks up on you. He asked good questions. He remembered what you said. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers, and by the end of the following weekend, we'd had our first real date. Dinner at a little Italian place on 17th that neither of us had been to before. We dated for 2 years. 2 years of Sundays at the farmer's market, of road trips to Banff in the fall, of cooking dinner together in his apartment, and arguing about whether the pasta needed more salt. Normal things, good things, the kind of things that make you think quietly, without saying it out loud yet, that maybe this is the person. I knew his family was wealthy. Old money, his dad had said once with a kind of sheepish grin. His grandfather had built a successful commercial real estate business in Edmonton that had eventually expanded across Alberta and into BC. Fletcher worked for the family firm, which I understood was both a privilege and a weight he carried. He talked about it that way sometimes, the expectation, the pressure of it. His mother, Helen Ames, I met about 3 months into dating. Fletcher had been careful about it, maybe more careful than I noticed at the time. He'd mentioned her often, but never directly, the way you mention weather. Just there, always in the background. When I finally did meet her, it was at a Sunday dinner at their house in Mount Royal, the kind of neighborhood in Calgary where the houses have names, practically, where the driveways are longer than some people's apartments. She was elegant, that's the only word. Slim, silver-haired, dressed even for a Sunday dinner at home like she was attending something. She smiled when Fletcher introduced me and said, "We've heard so much." But the smile didn't reach. I noticed that. I filed it and kept going. Dinner was fine. She asked me questions that were technically polite, but had a way of landing sideways. Where did I go to school? Where was my family from? Was my role at the firm the sort of thing with room for growth? I answered everything honestly. I smiled. I helped clear the table without being asked, which I could tell surprised her, and not entirely in a good way. Like I'd done something that didn't fit a category she'd prepared for me. On the drive home, Fletcher said, "She liked you." I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I believed him, but I also wasn't sure I was reading it right. Sometimes you walk into a room ready to be disliked, and you find reasons to confirm it. I was trying to be fair. Over the next year, I saw Helen at family dinners, at a birthday party for Fletcher's younger sister, at a charity luncheon. His mother invited me to with what felt like a test embedded inside the invitation. I was always pleasant. I was always on time. I brought wine when I came to the house. I thanked her for meals, genuinely, because she was a good cook and that wasn't nothing. But there were things, small things, at first. A comment at Christmas dinner about how refreshing it was that I'd made something of myself, phrased in a way that made it sound like the alternative had been genuinely possible. A remark at the charity luncheon about my bag. Just a look, really, not even words, the kind of look that you can't report to anyone because there's nothing to quote. A conversation about the firm during one of the Sunday dinners where she turned to include everyone in the room except me, not dramatically, just efficiently, like I'd already been subtracted. Fletcher saw some of it. I know he did, because sometimes he'd squeeze my hand under the table, but we never talked about it directly. I think I was afraid that if I named it, he'd have to choose between believing me and protecting an image of his mother that he'd been building his whole life. So I said nothing. I told myself it was manageable. He proposed in March. We were in Banff, standing near the Bow River, and it was cold and perfect, and the ring was his grandmother's, which I found out later had been a point of contention. His mother had wanted to keep it for the family. I said yes. I was happy. I am not rewriting that part. The engagement party was scheduled for late June at his parents' house in Mount Royal. His mother offered to host, and Fletcher thought it was a gesture of goodwill, and I thought maybe he was right, and I tried to meet it that way. The guest list was mostly his family and their friends. My side was smaller. My parents, my brother Declan, a few close friends from work and university. I need to say something about Declan. He's 4 years older than me. He's a former RCMP officer who now runs private security consulting out of Vancouver, and he has a way of walking into a room that makes people unconsciously straighten up. He's not intimidating on purpose. He just carries himself like someone who has seen a lot of situations and knows how most of them end. He and I are close in the way that matters. Not always in touch, not constantly talking, but the kind of close where when something goes wrong, you know exactly who you're calling. He couldn't make the party. He'd told me weeks before. He had a work commitment in Vancouver that weekend, a client he couldn't move. He was apologetic. I told him it was fine. It was. The party was a Saturday afternoon, starting at 2. The house looked the way it always looked, but more so. Flowers, catered food, a bartender, about 60 people, Helen in a pale blue dress, perfectly composed, playing host in the way that people do when they've been doing it their whole lives. And they know it, and you know it, and they know you know it. The first hour was fine. Fine as in, surface tension holding. I circulated, I talked, I laughed at the right moments. My mother found me once near the kitchen and said quietly that the house was something else, and I squeezed her arm and said yes, it was. My father shook Fletcher's hand with genuine warmth. I watched that and felt something open up in my chest, something hopeful. The moment happened near the garden, around the 3 o'clock mark. I was standing with 2 of my girlfriends from university, Ren and Sophie, and we were talking about something completely unrelated to anything, something about a show we'd all been watching, when Helen appeared. Not drifted over, appeared. The way someone appears when they've decided something before they start walking. She said something to Ren and Sophie first, something gracious and dismissive that sent them off toward the drinks table, and then she turned to me. "I'd like a word," she said. Not a question. We stepped slightly apart from the nearest cluster of people, not so far that it looked like anything. Just enough. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I want you to know that I've never been comfortable with this." I said, "I'm sorry, Fletcher." She said it simply. "He has responsibilities to this family, to what's been built here. And I worry that certain choices, certain attachments, can complicate those responsibilities in ways that don't become clear until it's too late." I understood what she was saying. I want to be clear that I understood exactly what she was saying. I just needed a moment to decide what to do with it. I said calmly, "I think Fletcher and I are good for each other." She smiled. "Of course you do." And then something shifted in her face. Not rage, not even anger exactly, more like a decision being executed. And she said, lowering her voice, "You are not what this family needs. You never were. And frankly, I think somewhere in that practical little head of yours, you know that." I was 32 years old. I had done nothing wrong. I was standing in her garden, wearing a dress I'd bought specifically for this day, holding a glass of sparkling water, and she was telling me that I was not enough, and she was doing it quietly enough that no one would hear. I opened my mouth to respond. That's when she slapped me. Not a shove, not a grab, a slap. Open hand across my right cheek, sharp and fast and completely deliberate. I went absolutely still. She held me. Her expression didn't change. And then, before I could process anything, she did it again. Left side, same deliberateness, same calm. The world went very quiet. There was a ringing in my ears that might have been from the impact, or might have been from the fact that my entire nervous system was trying to catch up with what had just happened. A few people nearby had turned. Not everyone, but some. I saw a woman I didn't know with her hand over her mouth. I saw one of Fletcher's cousins with his phone half raised. Helen straightened her posture and said softly, "Think about what I've said." And then she walked away, back toward the center of the party, like nothing had happened. I stood there for approximately 10 seconds. Maybe less, maybe more. I don't know exactly. Then I set my glass down on the nearest table, walked through the garden gate, and went around the side of the house to the front driveway. I sat on a low stone wall near the edge of the property. My face was hot. My hands were not shaking, which surprised me. I took out my phone and I called Declan. He picked up on the second ring. I said, "She slapped me. Twice. In front of people." He said, "Who?" I said, "Helen." There was a pause. Not a long one. Then he said, "Where are you right now?" I told him. I told him the address, the neighborhood, that I was outside. He said, "Don't go back in." I'm getting in the car. It was a 10-hour drive from Vancouver. I said, "Declan, it's 10 hours." He said, "I know how long it is. Don't go back in." I sat on that wall for a while, long enough that Fletcher came out looking for me. He found me and stopped a few feet away, reading my face, and I watched his expression go through several things in quick succession. "My mother said there was an incident," he said. "An incident." I looked at him. "She slapped me, Fletcher, twice." He ran a hand through his hair. "She didn't mean. She gets worked up sometimes, her anxiety. She slapped me in the face at our engagement party." He was quiet. Then, "Can we not make this into a thing right now? There are 60 people inside." I heard that sentence. I want you to hear it too, because I have thought about it many times since. Can we not make this into a thing? Like it was a thing I was manufacturing. Like what had happened to my face was a narrative choice I was making. I said, "I'm going to stay out here for a bit." He went back inside. Fletcher's sister found me about 20 minutes later. Her name is Waverly. She's 27, and she is not her mother. She came around the gate, sat down next to me on the wall without asking, and said, "I saw it." I looked at her. I was by the rose bushes. I saw both of them. She paused. That's not the first time she's done something like that to someone who got close to Fletcher. Not exactly like that. But things. She pushed his last girlfriend's friend at a dinner 3 years ago. It was called an accident. She made a small, flat sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "It wasn't an accident." I absorbed that. "You should know," Waverly said, "that her friend group saw it today, and they will absolutely protect her version of events, just so you're prepared." I thanked her. She went back inside. I appreciated that she'd come out at all. Around 5 o'clock, the party wound down. People left. My parents found me outside. My mother took one look at my face and knew something had happened, and I told her quietly, and I watched her go still, the way she does when she's deciding whether to act immediately or wait. My father put his hand on my shoulder and said nothing, which was exactly right. I did not go back into the house. I did not say goodbye to Helen. I got into my parents' car and we drove to their hotel in Kensington. And my mother made tea in the tiny kettle on the desks, and we sat there and I told them everything. Declan arrived at 11:37 that night. I know the exact time because I was still awake, sitting on the small couch in my parents' room when his rental car pulled into the lot. He knocked, came in, looked at my face. The bruising had started to show slightly on my cheekbone by then, and sat down across from me and said, "Tell me everything." I did. All of it. From the first Sunday dinner to that afternoon, everything I'd minimized, everything I'd decided was manageable. Everything I'd not said to Fletcher because I was afraid of what it would cost. Declan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know this is assault." I said yes. He said, "Are you going to file?" I thought about it. I said, "I don't know yet." He nodded. "Okay, we'll figure that part out. But first," he paused. "Does Fletcher know I'm here?" I said I hadn't told him. Declan said, "Good." The next morning, Declan called Fletcher. I was not in the room for the call, but I heard his side of it, and it was brief, and at the end of it Fletcher arrived at the hotel within 45 minutes, which told me something about what Declan had said. I won't recount that entire conversation, because some parts of it are still mine, still private in a way I want to keep. But the shape of it was this. Fletcher came in expecting, I think, to manage things, to smooth them over the way he'd always smoothed things over, to find the version of this that let everyone keep going. Declan sat in the corner of the room and said almost nothing. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. The fact that he was there, that he'd driven through the night to be there, said everything that needed to be said about what kind of family I had and about what kind of weight this carried. Fletcher tried several things in sequence. He tried framing it as a misunderstanding, which didn't land. He tried the anxiety explanation again, which landed worse the second time. He tried telling me his mother was mortified and had been upset all night, which I found interesting, because she hadn't reached out to me directly, not once. I said, "If she's mortified, she can call me." She hadn't. She wouldn't. That was its own answer. At some point, Fletcher said, "I don't know what you want me to do here." I said, "I wanted you to stand up for me yesterday. I don't think I can ask you to do it retroactively." He left an hour later. I don't think either of us said the word over. We didn't need to. Here is what I didn't know yet. While all of this was happening, while I was sitting on that wall, while I was drinking tea in my parents' hotel room, while Declan was driving through the night, a video was making its way through a text thread among the guests who'd been near the garden. Fletcher's cousin, the one I'd seen with his phone half raised, had actually been filming something else entirely when the first slap happened, and had caught both of them on video. Partial angle, slightly blurry, but clear enough. He'd sent it to 2 people. Those 2 people had sent it to 4. By the morning after the party, the video had been forwarded enough times that it ended up with one of Fletcher's friends who I'd always liked, a guy named Russell, who called Fletcher directly and said he thought Fletcher needed to understand what people were seeing. I learned this from Waverly, who texted me 2 days after the party. She said the video had also, somehow, reached one of the senior partners at the Ames family firm, a man named Gerald, who had been a close friend of Fletcher's grandfather. Gerald was not happy. Not about the slap itself, though he was, but about the visibility of it, about what it said, about what it meant for the family's standing among the people who'd been at that party and were now talking. I'll say this plainly. I did not orchestrate any of that. I did not send the video anywhere. I didn't ask anyone to spread it. I didn't make a single call that weekend designed to damage Helen's reputation. I sat in a hotel room and drank tea and talked to my family. That's all. But the world has a way of surfacing things. A week after the party, Helen Ames called me. I was at work, in the middle of a project meeting, and I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the voicemail in the parking lot of my office building at 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening. The message was 4 minutes long. She began by saying she'd been trying to reach me. She said that things had gotten out of hand at the party and that there had been a regrettable moment that she hoped I could understand in the context of a stressful period for the family. She said she had never intended any harm. She said she hoped I could appreciate how much was expected of her, how much pressure she was under, and how sometimes those pressures expressed themselves in ways that were unfortunate. Then her voice shifted, became smaller. She said she was sorry, not a clean sorry, a sorry wrapped in explanations, a sorry with asterisks. But the word was there. She said she had been speaking to Gerald and to Fletcher and to some of the other people involved with the firm, and that she understood that the situation had created consequences that were difficult. She said she hoped I would be willing to have a conversation about how to move forward. I stood in that parking lot for a long time. Then I called Declan. He answered and I said, "Helen called. She's apologizing." He said, "What kind of apology?" I said, "The kind where she's also describing her own suffering." He made a small sound. "What do you want to do?" That was the right question. Not what should I do, what do I want? I thought about it honestly. I thought about the Sunday dinners and the sideways comments and the charity luncheon and the wall in the driveway and the ringing in my ears and the bruise on my cheekbone. I thought about Fletcher saying, "Can we not make this into a thing?" I thought about Waverly on the wall beside me saying it wasn't an accident. I said, "I don't want to move forward. Not with her. Not with any of it." Declan said, "Okay." I said, "I'm filing." He said, "I'll help you find someone good." I filed a police report the following Monday. The Calgary Police Service took it seriously. Assault is assault regardless of the setting, regardless of who the person is, regardless of how much the house costs. I had Waverly's eyewitness account and I had the video, which by then had been sent to me directly by Fletcher's cousin with a message saying he was sorry he hadn't come forward sooner. I am not going to describe in detail what happened after that, because some of it is still working through processes that aren't finished, and some of it is genuinely not mine to describe because it involves people I don't know well. What I can tell you is that the charges were filed, that they were taken seriously, that Helen Ames, who had walked away from me in that garden with the composure of someone who had never once faced a consequence, found out what it felt like to have something follow her into a room she couldn't control. I also did not go back to Fletcher. That's the part people sometimes find surprising, I think, because the question I get, the question underneath the question, is whether I would have stayed if he'd handled it differently. If he'd come outside and stood next to me instead of asking me not to make it into a thing. If he'd been the person I'd thought he was on those road trips and in that kitchen arguing about pasta. The honest answer is, I don't know. Maybe. People are complicated. But he wasn't that person when it counted, and you don't get to rewind the moment that matters and re-record it more heroically. You find out who someone is in the moment of friction, and I found out. I have to live with what I found out. So does he. Declan drove back to Vancouver 10 days after the party. Before he left, we had breakfast at a place in Inglewood that I've been going to since university. The kind of spot with mismatched chairs and very good eggs and coffee that's propsly strong. He paid, which I let him do, and we sat there for a long time after we'd finished eating just talking, the way we sometimes do. He asked me how I was, actually, not just logistically. I thought about it honestly. I said, "I feel like I've been walking around a corner for a long time, and I finally got to see what was on the other side." He said, "Was it worse than you thought, or better?" I said, "Clearer." He nodded. He understood what I meant. I still live in the same apartment in Beltline. I still drive the Civic. I went back to work the Monday after everything happened, and I sat down at my desk and I opened my project files and I did my job, because that's what you do. The ordinary life is still there waiting for you, even after the extraordinary thing, and most days I'm grateful for that. The ring went back. I kept it for a week, which surprised me. I thought I'd send it back immediately, but I found I needed to hold on to something concrete for a few days, some physical object that was evidence the last 2 years had been real before I let it go. Then I packaged it up and sent it registered mail, and that was that. My friends were good. Ren and Sophie, who'd been sent to the drinks table while Helen said what she said to me, were furious in the useful way. Not the way that requires managing, but the way that keeps you company. They took me for dinner in early July at a place on Stephen Avenue, and we stayed until they closed, and I laughed genuinely, for the first time in a while, at something that had nothing to do with any of this. There's something I keep coming back to, though. Something Waverly said to me on that wall, which was the most honest thing anyone said to me that weekend. She said, "I've been watching my mother do versions of this my whole life," and then she said, very quietly, "I'm sorry it took this long for someone to not just walk away from it." I think about that, about what it means that the women in that family had spent years absorbing things and finding ways to continue. About what it costs to do that. About what it would have cost me if I'd found my way of continuing instead of sitting down on that wall and calling my brother. I paid a high price for the last 2 years. I'm aware of that. I spent them in a situation that was always going to end this way, and I accommodated more than I should have, and I didn't say the things I should have said sooner because I was trying to be fair to a person who was not being fair to me. That's a true thing about me, and I'm not going to prettify it. But I also sat on a wall, and I called my brother, and I told him the truth, and that's how things change. Not always dramatically, not always fast, but that's how they start to change. Calgary in the summer is something else entirely. Long evenings, that particular prairie light that lasts until 9 o'clock, everything stretched out and golden. I walked home from the office on a Thursday in August, down through the neighborhood, past the trees that were thick and full, and I thought about nothing in particular. The city going on around me. People on bikes, people with dogs, a kid running through a sprinkler in a front yard. Ordinary and good. Both things at once. It's enough.